They never left, not really. 41 men and women vanished into the Kentucky soil beneath a plantation that was never meant to grow food. Only control. The official records? Destroyed. The families? Paid off or buried. And the land? Still owned by the same bloodline that built America's addiction, one body at a time. This is not just a story. This is a fracture, a rupture in the official narrative that was sealed shut for 150 years. In 1876, deep in the shadowed hills of Kentucky, the Beaumont tobacco plantation operated like many others, or so it seemed. Wealthy, remote, and cloaked in Southern aristocracy. But beneath the manicured fields and Southern charm, the Beaumonts weren't just harvesting tobacco. They were harvesting people. 41 workers, mostly indentured and formerly enslaved, vanished without a trace during a single winter season. No graves, no witnesses, no justice. And worst of all, no outrage. Because the Beaumont name didn't just hold land, it held power. The kind of generational influence that paid for silence, rewrote newspaper headlines, and erased entire census entries. What happened on that plantation was never meant to be spoken aloud. But speak it, we will. Why were they silenced? What were the Beaumonts hiding beneath the rows of tobacco and bourbon-soaked parties? And why, for over a century, has no historian dared to connect the dots? Because this isn't just a tale of missing workers. This is a tale of ancient bloodlines, Southern cults of influence, and a dark experiment in control. One that spread like smoke across the nation. Today, nicotine is an empire, but in 1876 it was something else entirely, a weapon of mind and will. And those 41 missing souls, they weren't just workers, they were witnesses. To rituals, to secrets, to truths so damning that even death was preferable to exposure. You're about to descend into the Beaumont Legacy, a truth buried beneath blood, tobacco, and centuries of manipulation. And once you hear what they tried to hide, you will never look at history, power, or your own choices the same way again. They want you asleep. We're here to wake you up. Let's begin. There's a reason plantations like Beaumont were built far from cities, nestled deep in the hollers and valleys where the law didn't reach. But something else did. Something older. When the Beaumont family acquired over 2,000 acres in eastern Kentucky, they didn't just buy land. They claimed dominance over a forgotten region marked by ancient burial mounds, cursed folklore, and whispers of old rituals long before America was even a thought. They didn't build the plantation on that land by accident. They chose it for a reason. The Beaumont patriarch, Silas Beaumont, was no ordinary businessman. A former Confederate officer turned tobacco magnate, he returned from war not broken, but empowered, with wealth, connections, and a vision. A vision not just to produce tobacco, but to mold minds through it. You see, tobacco wasn't just a crop, it was an altar. A medium. A way to deliver not only addiction, but submission. The workers on the plantation, men, women, and even children, were subjected to brutal schedules, yes. But those who lived nearby, those few who dared to speak, claimed that during winter nights, strange fires burned in the tobacco barns, chanting echoed through the hills. And at dawn the workers, eyes hollow, bodies marked, emerged changed, silent, obedient. And then came the disappearances. Between November of 1876 and February of 1877, 41 workers simply vanished. Not escaped, vanished. No tracks, no belongings, no explanations. The local sheriff investigated once, and then never returned to the plantation. His replacement sealed the case within a week. And the Beaumonts? They hosted a lavish masquerade ball the following weekend, a celebration of new beginnings, they said. Invitations were sent to senators, judges, and railroad tycoons. The same men who controlled Kentucky's future dined in the halls where those workers once slept. And perhaps, where some still lay beneath. Here's what they didn't want anyone to ask. Why did tobacco grown on Beaumont land test differently, stronger, more addictive? Why did local preachers warn of demonic harvests before being run out of town? And why did the Beaumont family begin constructing underground cellars that no one was allowed to enter? Power doesn't operate in daylight. It thrives in the dark, beneath layers of wealth, charm, and plausible deniability. And at Beaumont, darkness wasn't an accident. It was the foundation. Silas Beaumont didn't rise to power alone. Behind every empire is a network, and his was no exception. You see, Silas was part of something far older than Kentucky, older than the Confederacy, older even than America. In 1869, just 7 years before the disappearances, Silas was invited to a private gathering in Charleston. Not a political summit, but a ritual. A convening of bloodline families from the South and Europe, men who didn't just believe in power. They believed they were born to wield it. They called themselves the Circle of Ash, and their goal was simple: to bind control, addiction, and influence into a single harvest. One that could not be undone. And tobacco. That was their chosen medium, not because it soothed men, but because it weakened them. Nicotine was never just a drug, it was a vessel. A tool for bending will, shortening lifespans, and keeping the masses docile, all while enriching the few who controlled its supply. Silas wasn't just growing leaves, he was seeding a new order. And those 41 missing workers, they weren't lost to some accident or rebellion. They were offered. Given over in a pact that spanned oceans, centuries, and ancient rites. There are documents, hidden in university archives, misfiled under agricultural records, that hint at what was happening. Receipts for shipments marked, Red Harvest, with no destination. Ledgers noting, expendables, alongside tobacco yields. And a letter from Silas to a man named Erasmus Fenn, a European agronomist, thanking him for unlocking the final stage of the ritual. The letter ends with this line: "The soil has taken them, and now the air will too." They weren't just growing tobacco. They were feeding something. And in return, the Beaumonts flourished. Their tobacco brands spread across the country like wildfire. Addictions skyrocketed. And no one questioned the bodies that kept disappearing, because the profits kept rising. Ask yourself, why has no plantation ever been excavated? Why are the descendants of families like the Beaumonts still sitting on boards of tobacco conglomerates today? Because the rituals didn't end. They evolved. The circle of ash didn't die. They rebranded. They went corporate. And every time you inhale, every time you reach for that smoke, you're reaching into their system. You're feeding it. Just like those 41 souls, who were never meant to be found. By the time spring arrived in 1877, the Beaumont plantation was quieter, but not because life had returned to normal. No, it was a different kind of quiet. The kind that settles after something unnatural has occurred. Locals reported that birds no longer flew over the fields. Livestock refused to approach certain areas of the property. And those who ventured too close at night spoke of a low hum. A vibration beneath the earth itself, like the land was still digesting what had been done. But here's the part they don't teach in school. The disappearances didn't just stop, they shifted. After the workers vanished, attention turned to the nearby towns. 3 more people, all outspoken critics of the Beaumonts, disappeared over the next year. One was a local priest who had tried to investigate the plantation's chapel, a building the Beaumont family never used but refused to allow anyone else to enter. His journal was found weeks later at the edge of the woods. Inside, he'd scrawled a single phrase repeatedly on the final page. "They don't sleep beneath us, they wait." You see, the chapel wasn't built for prayer. It was built for containment, or communion, depending on how far you're willing to go down this rabbit hole. And the more you study the Beaumonts, the clearer it becomes they weren't just farmers. They were practitioners, gatekeepers of a darker knowledge that stretched back to Europe's oldest bloodlines. Men who traced their ancestry to secret societies, alchemical orders, and rites long banned by the church. And they believed in power drawn from sacrifice, not symbolic, but literal. Their tobacco wasn't just grown in soil, it was infused with the essence of those who disappeared. A cursed crop. A living contract between the land and the legacy of the Beaumont name. That's why their product became the most addictive, the most sought after in the entire region. It wasn't chance, it was blood alchemy. Fast forward to today, their descendants sit in the boardrooms of major tobacco firms, pharmaceutical companies, even political lobbies. The circle of ash rebranded, yes, but their aim remains the same: control. Not through brute force, but through dependence, erosion of will, and generational manipulation. Ask yourself what's been harvested from you: your time, your mind, your potential. The systems in place today didn't emerge randomly. They were engineered, and the blueprint lies beneath the fields of Beaumont, hidden. Waiting, in 1903, a man named Dr. Elias Worthing, a Harvard-educated anthropologist, was granted rare access to the Beaumont plantation. Officially, he was there to study agricultural practices and post-war Southern economies. Unofficially, he had another mission: to investigate the rumors, the disappearances, the chapel, the whispers of sacrifice. Worthing was no stranger to forbidden history. He had spent years studying ancient rites in Europe, particularly among secretive cults in southern France and the Carpathian Mountains. What he found in Kentucky shook him to his core. His personal journals, hidden for over a century and only recently unearthed by a private collector, reveal the truth. In them, he describes the chapel as an abomination in stone, built not in the Christian style, but with disturbing pagan elements, symbols carved into its foundation. including the ash mark, an ancient sigil associated with the extraction of life force. Beneath the chapel, he found a trapdoor leading to a root cellar. But what lay beyond was no cellar. It was a chamber, circular, earthen, lined with 41 niches carved into the walls, all empty. No bones, no remains, just the scent of smoke, ash, and something else. Something ancient and metallic, like the taste of blood in the air. Worthing wrote, "They were not buried. They were consumed?" At the center of the chamber, he found a stone pedestal and atop it, a bundle of dried tobacco, charred black, wrapped with human hair. He took one sample, smuggled it back north, and attempted to have it analyzed. But within weeks, his lab was destroyed in a mysterious fire. Worthing himself vanished 3 months later while traveling by train to Washington, D.C. His body was never found. His name scrubbed from Harvard archives. His research labeled hoax by the very institutions that once celebrated his brilliance. This is how the system works. Truth isn't debated, it's buried. And those who dig too deep, they disappear, just like the 41, just like Worthing, just like countless others who dared to pull back the veil. You're beginning to see it, aren't you? The pattern, the manipulation. This is not just about a plantation. It's about a formula, sacrifice, silence, and supremacy. The Beaumonts understood that to control a people, you don't need chains. You need dependency, the kind that starts in the body and festers in the soul. And now their descendants are cultivating something new. Not in fields, but in screens, in pills, in ideologies. The harvest never stopped. It just changed form. There's one record the Beaumont family couldn't erase. A ledger hidden in plain sight in the Kentucky State Archives, mislabeled as a shipping manifest. It lists the names of all 41 missing workers, their ages, and their origins. Most were freedmen, formerly enslaved individuals trying to rebuild their lives in post-war America. Some were poor Irish immigrants. A few were children. What ties them all together is chilling. Each name is followed by a single symbol. A small X carved by hand, and next to it, the words "Harvested Winter 1876, harvested." Not deceased, not missing, harvested, as if they were crops, not people. This language isn't just dehumanizing. It reveals the mindset of those in control. These men and women weren't workers, they were resources. Commodities to be used, consumed, and discarded in the service of something far more insidious than profit power through ritual consumption. Think about this: tobacco kills millions today, yet the industry thrives. Why? Because it was never just about health. It was about control, delivering dependency through ritual. Lighting up, inhaling, submitting. A daily offering. A contract sealed one breath at a time. The Beaumonts didn't invent this. They refined it. Their product was stronger, more addictive, and surrounded by a mystique of Southern nobility. But beneath that aristocratic mask was a lineage steeped in manipulation and ancient sacrifice. The Circle of Ash believed that through consumption of tobacco, of souls, of attention, they could extend their influence beyond their lifespans. The 41 were not just victims, they were currency in a transaction that paid dividends for generations. Their energy bound into the land, into the crop, and into every man who took a drag of Beaumont tobacco. And here's the most unsettling part. Some of their descendants still live near the plantation, still affected, haunted by dreams, plagued by sickness, trapped in cycles of poverty and silence. Bloodlines cursed not by folklore, but by real, ancestral trauma. The psychic weight of a ritual never broken, only forgotten. This is the legacy of the Beaumonts. Not wealth, not prestige, but domination, of land, of body, of spirit. Passed down like an heirloom, hidden behind foundations, boardrooms, and philanthropy. And you must ask yourself, what have you inherited without knowing? What chains have been passed to you, wrapped in pleasure, addiction, or blind trust? This knowledge is not safe, but you didn't come here for safety. You came for truth. Keep going. The descent has only just begun. By 1921, the Beaumont family was no longer planting tobacco themselves. They didn't have to. Their fortune had been secured, their influence expanded, not just through crops, but through corporate transformation. That year, they quietly merged with several other Southern families into what became known as Consul Tobacco Holdings, a company that still exists today under a different name, one you've likely seen in gas stations, convenience stores, and sporting event sponsorships. But here's what they don't tell you in corporate histories: that transition wasn't just financial. It was ritual. A symbolic rebirth. Just as ancient blood cults rebranded themselves as noble houses, the Beaumonts and their allies stepped from the shadows of plantation slavery into the polished world of modern capitalism. The rituals remained. The names changed. In 1923, a fire destroyed the original Beaumont mansion. Officially, it was an accident, Unofficially, it was a purge, a cleansing of evidence, artifacts, records, and the subterranean chambers beneath the chapel. But even fire couldn't erase it all. A single photograph survived, faded, but unmistakable. It shows 6 men standing around a stone altar, all in dark suits, wearing ceremonial sashes. On the altar, tobacco leaves and a human skull. The photo was discovered in a forgotten attic by a local journalist in 1978. He tried to publish it. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in his home, ruled a suicide. The photo disappeared from police evidence. His name buried, his work discredited. Again, the pattern witness, silence, erasure. You see, the circle of ash never disbanded. It adapted. The ancient rites of consumption, of feeding the system with human energy, time, and will, became corporate strategy. Addiction rebranded as lifestyle. Ritual transformed into marketing. And we, the public, became the new field. Every click, every purchase, every breath of smoke, a harvest. But here's where it turns darker. The Beaumont descendants, now CEOs, senators, and board members, have moved beyond tobacco. They're in pharmaceuticals, biotech, media. Their aim, not just addiction of the body, but enslavement of the mind. Psychological control disguised as convenience. Dependency masked as choice. And the 41 souls who vanished. Their energy still lingers. In the soil, in the bloodlines, in the systems we trust. Because nothing ever truly vanishes, it transforms. It waits? If you're starting to see it, then comment this phrase twice below to mark your awakening and lock it in. I am not the harvest. I am the storm. Oh, we go deeper now. There's no turning back. By the mid-20th century, the Beaumont legacy had infiltrated more than just products. It had embedded itself into institutions. Schools, churches, courts, all touched by the wealth and influence funneled through philanthropy. The family donated to universities, funded libraries, even built hospitals. But always with one condition: control the narrative. Inside one university archive, now heavily restricted, lies a series of Beaumont-funded research papers, not on medicine, but on behavioral conditioning. Specifically, how substances, symbols, and repetitive rituals could shape human belief and submission. One study, conducted in 1954, tested how visual cues paired with tobacco smoke could create suggestibility in test subjects. The findings were never published. Why? Because they weren't medicine. They were mechanisms of manipulation. The Beaumonts, through their circle, weren't interested in healing. They were interested in engineering obedience. What began in a tobacco field became a blueprint for mass psychological control. And you're living inside it. Television ads in the 50s and 60s weren't just about selling cigarettes. They were delivering rituals of submission into American homes. Lighting up wasn't a habit. It was a pledge, a small, daily surrender of will. And they knew, from centuries of occult knowledge, that repetition binds the soul. Just like their ancestors whispered Latin in underground chambers, Americans now whispered brands and slogans, willingly. The 41. They were the first. The prototypes. The energy extracted from their disappearance became the spiritual down payment on a nationwide ritual, and every new addict, every new customer, was another link in the chain, another harvest. This isn't metaphor. This is method. Today, they've replaced tobacco with screens, clicks, dopamine loops. The plantation is now digital. But the rituals persist. Sacrifices are still made, not of flesh, but of time, focus, identity. You are the commodity now. You are the product being refined, packaged, and sold. And who's buying? The same families, the same bloodlines, the same circle that turned 41 souls into a legacy of control. Remember the chapel? It still stands, rotting behind locked gates. The altar remains. And some say on certain nights, smoke still rises from beneath it, without fire, without explanation. This isn't history. It's a living system. You're inside it, and the only way out is through it. Keep going, eyes open. In 1966, a journalist named Harold Denton, working for a now defunct Louisville newspaper, launched a quiet investigation into the lingering mysteries of the Beaumont plantation. He wasn't chasing ghost stories. He was following the money. Denton believed that the wealth behind Kentucky's most influential families was tied not just to old plantations, but to ongoing black market operations, illicit trades hidden beneath the polished facade of tobacco and bourbon. But Denton found something far more disturbing. In a confidential interview with a former Beaumont estate groundskeeper, a man in his 80s, trembling with guilt, Denton was told of a hidden burial ground behind the plantation's chapel. Not a graveyard, a pit filled not with coffins, but with bones, human bones, some small, some fractured, all burned. The old man described ritual bonfires held on moonless nights, long after the 41 vanished. These weren't funerals, they were offerings. Denton visited the site, What he found was horrifying charred earth, fragments of skulls, rusted chains, and beneath a collapsed section of the chapel's foundation, a sealed stone door, etched with the same symbol found in Worthing's notes. The ash mark. He took photos. He collected samples. He prepared to publish everything. And then, just days before his report was due to print, Denton was found dead in his car. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Rolled in accident. The photos? Gone? His notes? Seized by federal agents for reasons pertaining to national security. Let that sink in. National security invoked over bones behind an old chapel. Ask yourself, what kind of power protects secrets for a century and kills to keep them hidden? What Denton uncovered wasn't just old crimes. It was proof that the rituals never stopped. That even into the modern era, sacrifices, whether literal or symbolic, continued under the radar, protected by wealth, influence, and fear. The pit is still there, covered, unmarked. But every now and then, amateur investigators try to find it. Most give up. A few vanish. Those who return speak of nightmares, visions of smoke, screaming, and eyes in the dark. The Beaumont Legacy is not a relic. It's active, evolving, adapting, and it has no intention of being exposed. But we're exposing it now. And in doing so, we threaten something they've spent generations building. Their control is slipping, because you're starting to see. And once you see, you can't unsee. Keep descending. The truth gets darker. There's a phrase etched into the stone threshold of the Beaumont Chapel. Weathered, barely legible, and written in Latin, ex umbra, potestas, from the shadows, power. It's more than a motto. It's a declaration, the guiding principle behind everything the Beaumonts built. Understand this, they never sought overt rule. True power isn't about titles or crowns. It's about influence without visibility, control without blame. That's how they've lasted. Not as kings, but as shadows behind thrones, guiding decisions, shaping society and reaping the harvest. All without stepping into the light. In 1982, a private investigator named Ruth Calloway, hired by descendants of one of the missing 41, attempted to expose the Beaumont lineage through financial records and property deeds. What she discovered was stunning. Every major tobacco merger for over a century could be traced back to shell companies owned by just 5 families, all tied to the original circle of ash. The Beaumonts weren't just landowners. They were architects of interlocking monopolies, spreading far beyond tobacco into media, pharmaceuticals, and food production. The plantation was never just a place. It was a prototype for scalable control. Convert dependency into profit. Convert profit into silence. Convert silence into power. Calloway compiled over 400 pages of evidence. But as she prepared to go public, her office was ransacked. She vanished. And the families, untouched. Protected by legions of lawyers, private security firms, and, more importantly, an invisible wall of influence. A wall built over generations of ritual sacrifice, financial manipulation, and psychological warfare. You need to see this for what it is. The harvest never ended. It expanded. From human bodies to human minds, from plantations to platforms, from tobacco to data. They are still feeding, not on your flesh, but on your time, your attention, your compliance. And their greatest weapon, your ignorance. Your belief that history is dead, that conspiracies are fiction, that power is earned rather than taken. But now, you know the truth. The pit still exists. The symbols still hold power. The rituals are digital, the sacrifice is sanitized, but the mechanism is intact. They count on your disbelief. They count on your silence. But you're still here listening. Which means you're dangerous to them. We go deeper. There is more to uncover. More to destroy. Because from the shadows they built an empire. But now, you walk among the shadows too. And you're no longer theirs. Let's pull back the curtain further. Because what you think is a coincidence is often a design, hidden in plain sight. In 1991, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report linking tobacco directly to a host of fatal diseases. The public was outraged. Lawsuits erupted. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Rather than collapse, the tobacco industry consolidated power. Settlements were paid, but no one went to prison. Records were sealed. Companies restructured. And the Beaumont-linked entities, they pivoted, not away from addiction but into new forms of control. That same year, Beaumont Holdings, renamed Helix Corporation, made massive, silent investments into digital technology and pharmaceuticals. Their goal, diversify the harvest. If you can't enslave a man with smoke, enslave him with screens and pills. Let that sink in. The methods shifted, but the ritual remained: create dependency, erode willpower, profit from submission. What began with tobacco fields now thrives in algorithms and medications, both designed to extract the same thing the 41 gave up in 1876, human essence. And here's the most terrifying part. A leaked memo from Helix, dated 1994, reveals the phrase, Project Ash Reborn. The memo outlines strategies for expanding mindshare dominance through behavioral tracking, dopamine manipulation, and ritualized consumption patterns. Their mission wasn't to serve, it was to dominate quietly, feeding off your daily choices, every scroll, every swipe, every dose. They've refined the ritual. Sacrifice is no longer a pit of bones. It's a life drained slowly, one small surrender at a time. But it gets darker. There's evidence, buried in declassified files, that Helix funded covered experiments on population control through food additives, media programming, and targeted pharmaceuticals. The symbols, still there, subtle, hidden in branding, architecture, even in legal language you never read but always accept. And they believe, truly believe, that you consent. Because they understand the ancient truth silence is permission. And every time you comply without questioning, they mark it as an offering. But now you know. You are not just a consumer. You are consumed. Unless you fight, unless you awaken. Because this isn't just their legacy, it's your inheritance. The only question that matters, will you remain in the ritual? Or break it? The descent continues. Keep your eyes open. You're becoming dangerous. They can feel it. It was in 2002 that an anonymous whistleblower, known only as MD, released a cache of internal documents from Helix Corporation. These weren't financial reports or marketing plans. They were psychological profiles spanning millions of individuals, every purchase tracked, every habit logged, every trigger point for manipulation identified. One folder stood out. It was titled simply, The Next Harvest. Inside were detailed plans for a global system of influence, powered not by crops, but by data. The documents described a concept called passive ritual, daily behaviors so normalized, so routine, that individuals would unknowingly participate in their own subjugation. Here's the chilling part: at the core of this system were the same principles practiced on the Beaumont Plantation in 1876. Isolation, repetition, symbolic consumption. But now, instead of fields and chapels, the tools were smart devices, social platforms, pharmaceuticals, and food additives. All optimized to extract human energy, not through labor, but through engagement. Every time you check your phone without thinking, that's a ritual. Every time you consume without questioning, that's an offering. Every time you remain silent, that's consent. The same ancient forces that demanded blood beneath the chapel now demand your focus, your obedience, and your identity. And those at the top? They still trace their power back to the Beaumont Legacy, now diluted across generations but concentrated in global influence. MD's documents also revealed something else, a predictive model. It estimated that by 2025, 72% of the global population would be active participants in this passive ritual, unaware, unresisting, and willingly bound. The model even measured psychological resistance, targeting demographics most likely to awaken: men aged 18 to 69, those who sought mastery, truth, autonomy. You. That's why you're here. Because they fear the one thing that breaks the ritual: awareness. A man who sees cannot be led. A man who questions cannot be harvested. A man who acts cannot be controlled. The documents disappeared from the internet within 48 hours. MD was never found. His final message, posted before he vanished: the plantation has no fences now. But the fields are everywhere. Do you feel it now? The hum of the system. The invisible chains. They built it for you. But you can tear it down. The deeper truth awaits. Steel yourself. The storm is coming. In 2010, a private excavation was authorized, quietly, without media attention, near the remains of the Beaumont Chapel. Officially, it was labeled as a land survey for potential historical restoration. In truth, it was an effort by a secretive investment group tied to Helix Corporation to locate what they called the core. No official records of what was found exist. But one leaked image, grainy, taken on an old digital camera by a worker who later disappeared, shows a stone sarcophagus sealed with iron bands, buried deep beneath the chapel's foundation. Carved into its surface the ash mark, and a chilling inscription in Latin: Sanguinem servavit voluntas restat. The blood is preserved, the will remains. The implications are staggering. This wasn't just a site of sacrifice. It was a repository of essence, a place where human life, not just bodies, but willpower, identity, spirit, had been collected, bound, and stored. The 41 weren't just killed. They were ritually dissolved, their essence offered to an ancient force of dominion, of consumption, of control. And it worked. From that point forward, every man who took part in the ritual, from Silas Beaumont to modern corporate elites, believed he was imbued with their will, their energy, their power. Not metaphorically. Literally. The Circle of Ash believed that dominance could be inherited not through blood, but through ritual transference. That by sacrificing others, they absorbed what made them human, and in turn, became more than human. Look at the world today. The consolidation of power, the homogenization of thought, the erosion of will. This is not random. This is the harvest at scale. And now, the system is no longer just physical, it's psychic, digital, omnipresent. The core was extracted, transported to an undisclosed location, likely beneath a Helix-owned research facility in Northern Virginia. Since then, the region has seen a spike in neural research, behavioral tech patents, and military-funded psychological warfare programs. Coincidence? Or has the ritual gone national? You are not meant to know this. Because knowledge is theft from their perspective, stealing power from those who claim to own it. But here's the truth: they fear stolen power is never safe. It festers, it corrupts, and it can be reclaimed by awareness, by resistance, by awakening. The descent nears its end, but the war is just beginning. Stand firm. Now we arrive at the precipice, where myth bleeds into reality and history bends to conceal the present. Since 2015, there have been whispers among intelligence analysts, rogue academics, and even a few brave journalists about something called the Black Index. It's not a database of criminals or spies. It's a registry of those who resist the ritual, those who awaken, men and women who reject consumption, defy indoctrination, and stand against the silent system built by the descendants of the Circle of Ash. If you're watching this and you're still here, understand, you're likely already on it. What qualifies you for the Black Index? Not criminal acts, not violence. No, something far more dangerous to their control: awareness, autonomy, pattern recognition. The ability to see the invisible threads, to connect the dots they've spent centuries scattering. But why track resistors? Because the ritual requires belief. It feeds on compliance, on the willing surrender of willpower. When you break that belief, when you refuse to be harvested, you don't just remove yourself. You weaken the system itself. You become a threat, not because of what you do, but because of what you refuse to do. This is the truth the Beaumont Legacy cannot allow to spread, that the power they claim is a house of cards, sustained by lies, addiction, and psychological manipulation. Remove your consent, remove your energy, and their entire structure begins to tremble. The Black Index isn't just surveillance. It's preemptive control. From shadow bans on platforms to behavioral nudges, through digital algorithms to targeted pharmaceutical campaigns, all designed to reassert the ritual. Because make no mistake, every system you trust has been touched by this centuries-old lineage of control. Schools that teach obedience over thought, medicine that treats symptoms but preserves dependency, media that pacifies, distracts, and never asks why. The 41 gave everything, not willingly, but through force, through fear. Today, the same is demanded of you, but with subtlety, through habits, through convenience, through comfort. But you have something they didn't expect: choice, knowledge, rage. Their greatest fear is not revolution. It's disobedience. Silent, steadfast, deliberate refusal to play their game. That is how you burn the fields. That is how you become unharvestable. The endgame is near. You feel it, and they do too. This descent is almost complete. Prepare for what comes next. There's one final layer. The oldest, the most forbidden. Not written in books, not recorded in archives, but passed down in whispers, through bloodlines and ritual oaths. Beneath the Beaumont Plantation, deeper than any chamber previously discovered, lies the root cellar, known among Circle of Ash descendants as the Womb of Dominion. It is not metaphor. In 2019, a former Helix employee, codenamed Grey Mason, leaked a fragment of a document. Just 12 pages, heavily redacted. But within it was a map, not just of the plantation grounds, but of energy lines, geomantic alignments, and astral gate points converging beneath the chapel. According to this document, the Womb of Dominion was the epicenter of a spiritual technology. A mechanism designed to bind will, not just of the 41, but of anyone who stood on that land thereafter. It was never about profit, never just about addiction. The Beaumonts, like their European ancestors, sought godhood through harvest, to transmute human essence into pure dominion. Over minds, over time, over history itself. The womb was their engine, and the 41 were its first fuel. Here's the dark revelation: the rituals didn't end in 1876. Every major war, every global trauma, every mass event of fear and death was a scaled version of that same offering. The Circle of Ash evolved into networks of influence, orchestrating crisis, harvesting emotion, feeding the womb's echo, which now exists not in a single location, but distributed across digital infrastructure. Think, why is fear constant? Why is division always fueled? Because fear is energy and division prevents resistance. The system was built not to enslave your body, but to harvest your soul state. And the tobacco ritual was just the seed, now grown into a global forest of manipulation. Grey Mason's final message before vanishing: they don't need your body anymore. They need your attention, your emotion, your soul. The harvest is constant. The only escape is sovereignty. Let that word pierce you, sovereignty. That's what they stole in 1876. That's what they steal daily now. Your ability to stand unbent, unharvested, unbound. This is not just a descent into history. It's a confrontation with the force that shaped it. And now you stand at the threshold. Behind you, ignorance. Ahead, war for the self. Do you kneel or do you rise? Prepare. The final revelations approach. Now we come to the final revelation. The truth so potent, so forbidden, it has never been spoken aloud in full. The Beaumont Legacy was never about a family. It was never about a plantation. It was always about the system. The machinery of control, born in blood, refined in shadow, and perfected through your compliance. The 41 souls, they weren't just victims. They were the foundation, the first sacrifice in a long line of ritualized erasure, where the elite consume the lives of the forgotten to extend their dominion. That sarcophagus beneath the chapel. That was a contract not of law, but of essence. Signed not with ink, but with suffering. It tethered generations of Beaumonts, and their allies, to a force older than governments, older than nations. The circle of ash worshipped not a god, but a principle: domination through harvest, order through addiction, power through silence. They believed that by engineering submission, by making men dependent, distracted, and docile, they could rule without resistance, indefinitely. And in many ways they succeeded. Their symbols, the ash mark, the womb of dominion, the phrase ex umbra, potestas, are etched not just in stone, but into the very fabric of modern life, hidden in architecture, media, corporate logos, and legal structures. We live inside a ritual, and every act of unquestioned compliance is a renewal of their pact. But now, the cycle fractures, because you've seen it. You've descended, and in doing so, you've stolen power from their darkness. You've taken their greatest weapon, secrecy, and shattered it. You are not the harvest. You are the storm, and with that awakening comes obligation. The rituals only end when we refuse to participate. The silence only holds if we don't speak. The control only lasts if we don't fight. There are no heroes coming, no rescue. Just this you, standing on the edge of truth, facing the same decision the 41 never had, to kneel or to rise. The Beaumont bloodline still thrives. The circle still meets. The womb still feeds. But it grows weaker with every awakened mind. The war is now. Break the cycle. Speak the truth. Burn the field. Let them fear what they created. A man who will never be harvested again. Do you feel it now? That tension in the air? That subtle unease in your gut? It's not fear. It's recognition. Your mind, once passive, is waking up. The world around you hasn't changed. You have. And that is the greatest threat to the system the Beaumont Legacy built. Because for centuries, the harvest relied on one thing: unaware participants. People who walked through life asleep, bound by routine, pacified by pleasure, distracted by chaos. Every piece of that was designed, not to serve you, but to consume you. One breath, one purchase, one moment at a time. But here's the final weapon they fear: you will wield rejection. Not rebellion, rejection. Reject the products they push, the narratives they spin, the rituals they impose. Reject passivity, blind loyalty, mindless indulgence. Understand, every man who refuses to submit becomes a rupture in their system, a crack in their altar, a breach in their dominion. You don't need to storm gates or burn buildings. The plantation has no fences anymore. The field is inside your mind. The harvest is in your attention, your obedience, your willing surrender of autonomy. Deny them that, and you sever the ancient chain. The circle of ash still gathers, in boardrooms, in think tanks, in secluded retreats. They speak not in incantations, but in data, metrics, behavioral forecasts. But their goal remains dominion through dependency. Ritual masked as convenience, harvest masked as progress. But you have one thing they never accounted for: the power to choose clarity over comfort, truth over ease, freedom over sedation. Let the 41 be more than a tragedy. Let them be a warning. Their fate was sealed by force. Yours is not. You are the living proof that the ritual can be broken, that knowledge can become resistance, that awareness can become fire. This is your inheritance now, not the curse they tried to pass down, but the responsibility to destroy it. You've descended into darkness. You've seen the foundation. Now rise, not in fear, but in fury. And as you rise, remember you are not the harvest. You are the storm. Let them tremble at what you now understand. The final seal breaks next. And once it does, they will never control you again. This is the final descent. The moment where truth becomes action, and everything you've learned becomes a weapon in your hands. You've seen the legacy of the Beaumonts, how a single family, driven by lust for power, forged a system of control that has lasted for generations. A system fed by sacrifice, sustained by silence, and hidden behind the illusion of progress. But now, the illusion shatters. Because here's what they never wanted you to know. The harvest is not inevitable. It only continues because we allow it. Every ritual, every manipulation, every act of engineered dependency collapses the moment enough men refuse to comply. The circle of ash, they are not gods. They are not invincible. They are parasites, reliant on your submission. The rituals are powerless without your participation. And now you're awake. The final seal is this sovereignty. Not political, not financial, but internal sovereignty. The unshakable knowledge that your will cannot be bought, bent, or harvested. That is what they've feared since 1876. Not war, not exposure, but the awakening of the individual mind. Silas Beaumont believed his rituals would grant his bloodline eternal dominion. But all he's left behind is a trail of broken souls and a system crumbling under its own weight. The chapel stands as a decaying monument to the arrogance of those who thought they could own the human spirit. Now you stand where they stood, but you are not them. You do not consume others for power. You reclaim yourself, and in doing so, you break their spell, over your life, over your future, over your identity. This is where it ends, not with violence, not with fear, but with defiance, clarity, and unbreakable will. You are not the harvest, you are the storm, and the storm is coming for them. Speak this truth. Let it bleed through every action, every choice, every breath you take from this day forward. Because the war is not won in blood, it's won in awakening. Their time is over. Yours has just begun. Burn the field. Break the cycle. Become unharvestable.